For this program, we will need to sort a two-dimensional array. This is going to be a 5x4 array, and it is based on the following. Our entire array should be sorted using bubble sort based on the first column in ascending order and display the entire array. We are then going to reset the array to its original contents, and we're going to do the same thing for the second column, but we're going to use selection sort, and then we're going to repeat that for the third column, but use shell sort. And lastly, we will repeat this for the fifth row, and we are going to use insertion sort for that. After we do all this, we're going to ask the user for a number. We're going to then search the fifth row of our array via insertion sort. We're then going to search for the number in our fifth row of our array that was sorted using insertion sort. So after this one, we're not going to reset it. And then we're going to use binary search to search for this. We will then display the entire column. We are given some examples of what our output should look like down here. So knowing this, we can turn to our code. We have our package main, this is for Eclipse, and then we have our public class driver. We are going to have our public static void main inside of here, and then we are going to have our sorting class. This main is going to run our program, and then we are going to make an instance of it where we will call our class. So our class name is going to just be called sorting. So we'll just call it class sorting. And inside of here, we're going to have all of the different bubble sort, shell sort, selection sort, and insertion sort. Basically everything that we're doing inside of here. Not a lot is going to be inside of our main method. We also have another piece of instruction that says our array. So this two-dimensional array will be declared as a global variable since it is going to be used everywhere. Since it's a global variable before our public static void main, but still inside of our driver class, we are going to make our initial array. So inside of here, since it's global, it's going to be a public. It's not going to change, so a static, and then it's type int. And to make a 2D array, we're going to need two brackets. So we'll need two like this. And we can just put them like this. We're going to need a name for our array, so we'll just call it ARR, short for array. And then we're going to set this equal to. And then normally in an array, we would come in here and we would just input numbers like this. However, in a 2D array, we are going to have this inside of these brackets. And that can be a little bit confusing, and you can write it out all in one line. However, it's quite easier to write it out like this. So when you start with your 2D array, you're going to have your outermost brackets like this. And then with a 2D array, you have a row, and the row is this first one. You have row, and then you have column. So that is how this works. So we have these rows that we're going to make, and then our columns are going to be the actual values inside of each of these brackets. We know it's going to be a 5x4 array, so if we wanted to, we can just control copy that and we can paste it in here. It's going to be a 5x4. So knowing that, we're going to need 5 rows, so we'll make some more of these, and we can move them over just like this. And this is for nothing other than neatness, easier to see. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we need to have 4 columns. We can fill our array up. We are going to do the values that were given to us right here. So these are like test values. We're not getting any user input for this one, so we're going to have 5, 3, 2, 16, and then we will go down to the next row where we have 9, 8, 10, and 17. And then we'll go down to the next row where we're going to have 4, 7, 11, 18, and then we are going to have 2, 5, 9, and 12. And lastly, we are going to have 7, 9, 4, and 10. And after all of these, we can see that there's a red mark. What we need is a comma. You can think of this as, you see how we have these values in here? Well, you can think of this as one big value, and we have to separate them with commas to have them in our 2D array. But this is how you would do it. So these are our rows, and then looking down, we have our columns. And so that is how we would make a 2D array. We're going to be in our public static void main, and inside of here, remember to do javadoc just for good practice. It's going to be a main method that we can say prints everything, and then our argument is the args. So inside of here, we want to make an instance of our sorting class. So what we need to do is have sorting. We'll just call it sort, and we're going to set this equal to a new sorting. I'm not going to pass anything in, and so we've created a new instance of this. This is underlined in red here, and that is because for some reason I put these parentheses here. When we create a class, as we've seen up here, we don't need parentheses, and it will actually not work if we have parentheses because we can't just pass anything into a class. So this is our fixed class, and this is our main method still. So knowing this, well, we've created an instance of it right here, and we need to have all of these methods written out. But we also need to copy our array. So what we're going to do, because every time we call this, we're going to pass in the array, we're not going to have any output, we're just going to change our array. But then we would have to look at it again, and we would have to look at it from the original array, because that's what the assignment's asking. So what we're going to do first is we're going to display the entire array. So inside of here, we'll have a system.out.println, and we're just going to print initial array like this. And then from here, we're just going to print our array. Well, we can't just call this and print this. We have to print every index. So what we can do is make a loop that goes over all of these indexes. So what we can do from there is make a toString method in this class. We are going to do sort.toString, and then inside of here, we are going to pass in our array. So we're just going to have ARR passed in. We can hover over this, and we're going to create this method down here, and this way is what it is going to look like. So we have created this. We'll get to this in a second, but before we do, we're going to have to create the other things first. So we know that we also need to copy our array once we manipulate it. However, we haven't manipulated it here, so we will just keep going on to the next one, which is bubble sort. So we have this bubble sort here, so we're going to print bubble sort. And in here, well, instead of printing this, we'll just include this with our method. So with the bubble sort, we're going to do sort dot, and then we're going to make our bubble sort class. So we'll just call this bubble sort, and then we're going to pass in our array here. And then we can create this method, and it will create it down here. So that will print the bubble sort. We're going to manipulate it here though. So before we print the bubble sort, we're going to need to copy it. We're going to need to copy it to a temporary 2D array. So we're going to make a new array. We'll do it int, and then we'll just call this temp. So we'll have temp, and we'll set this equal to our array because we haven't manipulated it yet. So we're just going to set this equal to, actually, we can't set this just equal to this, because if we set it equal to here, we're just going to get the address. What we need to do is we need to make a copy method, and this copy method is going to copy all of these values into our temp array. So we're going to have int temp like this, and then we're going to set this equal to sort dot, and then we'll just call this copy, and then we will have our array passed in. So it's going to make a copy of this array. We'll come back to that in a second. So we'll have this toString, and then we have copy. So this is good. And now what we're going to want to do after we've done this, we've manipulated our array, we're going to have to reset our array. And so in resetting our array, what we're going to do is say that, well, ARR has to be equal to our temp now, and that resets it. We're going to do the same thing for the next value. So, or the next search, sorry. We're going to do this for, it says selection sort. So we're doing this for the selection sort. So we can just change this sort type to selection sort. We're not going to recreate temp. We're just going to use temp again. We're setting it equal to sort.copy of ARR. But in fact, we don't even need to do this because the temp is always going to store a copy of our array. And since we're not manipulating it, we don't even need this. So we can take this out. all we're going to do here is we're going to sort with bubble sort, and then we need to reset our array by setting array equal to temp. So we can actually, as a matter of fact, we'll take this, and instead of putting it with print bubble sort, we will put it on its own underneath the create instance of sorting class. So we'll paste this in here, and we'll say, well, this is making a temporary copy of our array. I'm going to indent these just so it's a little bit easier to see. And so now that we've printed our selection sort, we're going to move on to the next one. And the next one is going to be printing the shell sort. So that's C. And in shell sort, we're just going to have to change this, and it'll be shell sort. We can hover over it and click create a method. I want to do these in order, so I'm going to just bring this down here. So knowing this, let's create the next one, which is insertion sort. So we'll copy this, and you can see that it's really the same for all of these. We just need to call the methods. So we're going to change this. Also, I spelled shell wrong, so we're going to have to come and correct this down here. And then we're going to make this insertion sort. We're hovering over this. We're going to click create method. This makes it right here. Let's just move it down right here, and we'll make comments for all of these in the future. So this is how our code will look like. And then after we do this, we're going to want to search the fifth row for user number. And we're going to do that later. So we'll come back to that. But for now, we're just going to look at all of our methods that we need to create. So if we scroll down, we're going to be in the toString part. And for the toString part, all we're doing is we're just printing out our array. So to print out our array, what we're going to do is we need to make a for loop. We'll have a for loop that goes over all these rows, and then an inner for loop, a nested one, that goes over all of these columns. So to make this a little easier, let's make two private variables. We're going to make a private, and we'll call this row, and we're going to set it to, well, we won't set it to anything right now. We're going to do private row, and then it's going to be an integer, so it should be private int row, and then we'll make a one for column. So we'll do private int row and column. We'll have a default constructor, so we're going to do public, and then it's going to be sorting because it has to be the name of our class if it's a constructor for it. And then inside of here, we're going to initialize our values. So row, we know is equal to 5, and then the column we know is equal to 4. So this is going to be, if we were to make comments for it, we'll call it the default constructor. Now that we have our default constructor, we can look into the toString method because we needed these rows 5 and 4. So inside of here, we'll have our outside for loop. And remember, this outside for loop is going to go over all of our rows. So we're going to do int a is equal to 0, and then we're going to run this as long as a is less than our row. And then we're just going to do a plus plus, so this will run through every single row. And then inside of here, we want to run through every single column. So we're going to do for loop. We're going to have int, and then b is equal to 0. And then we're running this as long as b is less than our column. And they're just going to do b plus plus. So inside of here, we're just going to have a print line. So we'll have sysout, and then we're going to do, we're going to call our array. We need to call the specific indexes. So we're going to do array, and we want to have our row be a, so it will first look over this first row. And then we want to call the column, and we know the column is changing for this inner for loop, so we'll just have b. We can try running this. We'll save it and run it, and this gives us the initial array. It's kind of like this, it's really long, so to fix that, we'll just make it a print instead of a print line. So it now prints them all in one line. That's also a problem. We just want it to print a new line after this column. So what we can do is from here, underneath here, we'll do a sysout with a print line. And so now with our method like this, we can run it again. And this is going to be our initial array. So we have all these here, 5, 3, 2, 1, 6, 9, 8 like this. We should have a space in between them. So what we can do is we can come back in here, we can append a space, and let's run it again. And it'll look like this. Well, we can make it a little bit neater if we wanted to. So if we want to make it a little bit neater, we can come out here in the front. We can do a print line, and then we'll add this brace right here. And then we'll do that at the end right here. So we're going to add a brace like this, and then we can add a space here, and we can try running it. So we have these braces. Ooh, we have a print line, which should just be a print right here. And now we have them all in one row. There's two spaces here, so what we can do is actually add some commas in here to make it even neater. So if we add a comma in here like this and run it, we can have a comma for all of these. The reason why we have this comma out here is because we are going to print out the 16 and the comma. So what we can do to fix this is just print it out one less than our column, and then underneath this we can come down here, and then we're going to, in our print line actually, let's see if we can do it here, we are just going to do our array, the ARR, index A, and then we're going to have it at the column -1, because this is going to get the column, which is 4, and that counts from 1, 2, 3, 4, but we're going from index 0, 1, 2, 3. So we have column -1, then we're going to append this, and we can try to run it now. And if we do this, we can see that our code looks a lot neater. We have these commas, and we have this brackets. So that is going to be our toString method. We've created that. That looks good. If we were to add some comments right here, we're going to have this parameter, and this is going to be the array to be printed. And then for our comment, we can just write a toString method that will print the array passed in. And that is a pretty descriptive Java commentation right there. And we've done it. So this is our toString method. Next, we're going to work on our copy. And the copy is for this part right here, sort.copy. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to take this array, and then we're going to return a copy of our array. So inside over here, we're going to make a new array, which we're going to return, which is the copy. So we're going to have int, and then we'll call this ARR copy, and then we're going to set this equal to a new int, and then we need to size up our array. So to size our array, we're going to just put in row and column, and this will make it a 5 by 4 array. Now we can start filling in the values from this array. So we're going to have two for loops. It's going to be pretty similar to what we had here, and we'll demonstrate that. So we have this for loop, and inside of here we're going to do int a is equal to 0, and this is just to copy the rows. So a is less than our row, and then we're going to do a++. And then inside of here we're going to have a nested for loop. We'll have int b is equal to 0, and then we're running this as long as b is less than our column, and we don't need to worry about any fancy things this time, so we don't need to change it to column -1. And so inside of here we're just going to add into here. So we're going to do ARR copy, and we're going to fix the index to be A and then B. And so this is where it's going to be adding it into. Right now it's 0, 0, and then it's going to get incremented every single time. And then we're just going to do ARR, because we're copying the exact same thing, A and then B. And so this is going to be our copy. Once we're done with all this, we can break out of this loop, and we're just going to want to return our temp array, or our array copy. And so that is going to be the copy method, and then we can make some commentations right here. Our parameter is the array to be copied, and then we're returning our copied array. And then inside of here, for the commentations, we can just write method that copies the array passed in. And so this is our copy method. We have our copy and our toString done. To test if this works, what we can do, well actually we'll test if it works after we manipulate it with the bubble sort, and then we're going to have this array.copy, and then what we can do is we can print our initial array. So we'll copy this just for a test, and after our bubble sort, we'll print it right here just to see if it actually copied it or not. And now we can move on to our bubble sorts, and this is the first of our sorting. So what a bubble sort does, because that's pretty important to know, is it's a sorting algorithm, iterates through a list, compares and swaps adjacent elements. So if the second element is less than the first element, bubble sort will use nested loops to swap them. And then we're going to do this for our entire column. Or I'm sorry, our entire column. So we're going to sort through this entire column, and we're going to have to move these columns as well. So let's say this 4 needs to be swapped with this 9. Well, this whole row is going to be swapped with this row. And then now that our 4 is in this row, this whole row will be swapped with this row. So we're swapping the whole row based on the actual column that we're looking at. And we can see that in the Google Docs right here, or the Microsoft Word. So let's look at the bubble sort now. So in the bubble sort, we first want to print that it is a bubble sort. So we'll have print, we'll have a sysout statement, and we'll say bubble sorted array. Now that's done, we can move on to the actual code. So we want a for loop that's going to run and check every single row, except for our last row. And the reason why we don't need to check our last row is because, let's look at this. Well, we are going to swap this, or we're not going to swap these two, but we're going to swap the 4 with this, and then we're going to swap this with the 4. So 9's right here. We're going to swap this, we're going to bring it all the way up, and so 9 will be right here. And then since this value is less, we'll swap it with our 9. After we do those swaps, well, we don't need to swap the last row because the last row already has the largest. And so for the bubble sort, we're going to have our for loop, int a is equal to 0, and then we're going to run a as long as it is less than our row minus 1. That's because we don't need to check the last row. We're going to have a++. So now what we're going to need to do is look at the next row. So again, this for loop right here is going to run for each but the last row. And now this inner for loop is going to look at the next row. And then inside of this for loop, we're going to compare them, but we'll get to that in a second. So int b is equal to 0, and then we're going to run this as long as b is less than our row minus the a value minus 1. And the reason why we have minus a is because we don't need to check something. We have less to check every single time we make our bubble sort swap. And so, well, if a is equal to, let's say, 3, we have already swapped all of the values before that, so we don't need to check them again. So we're going to subtract a and subtract 1. And then we're going to do b++. And then inside of here, we need to actually compare it to the next row. And we know that if the current row that we're looking at is greater than the next row, we need to swap it. And so that means we're going to use an if statement. We're going to say that if our array and then the column is the current, or I'm sorry, not column, but the row. So if we look at these two, if the row that we're looking at, b, with the index of 0, because we're going to be in this first column. Remember, it's row and then column. So b is the row, we're looking at this first row, and then we're always, for bubble sort, looking at this 0th column. And that's per the instructions, saying the first column, but index-wise, this is the 0th column. So if this is greater than our array, and then we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to have b plus 1 because we want the next value. And then still at the 0 for the column, we're going to be in here, and we need to swap them. So we'll say performing swap. And so performing our swap, we're going to do a for loop. The only reason why we're doing a for loop for this is because we need to swap all of these columns based on if these first ones change. So if the first column's changed, the whole row needs to be swapped. The output will look like this. And so that's kind of helpful to see. And so in here, we're just going to make another arbitrary integer. So we'll say int c is equal to 0, and then we're going to run this as long as c is less than our column. And this is because we have to swap every single column. And then inside of here, we're just going to do c++. That way we can increment it every single time. And then we are going to have our int. We'll create a temporary value to store this value right here. because we're going to overwrite it with this value, and then afterwards we're going to set this value equal to this value. It'll make more sense in a second, but we'll say int temp is equal to, and we want it to equal to this value. So we're going to paste that in here. And so from here, we're going to grab this, and we're going to set it equal to this value right here. And then we are going to set this one to be equal to this, which has been overwritten, but we've stored it in our temp so we can do this. Now we do have to change some things. We're not just dealing with the 0th column anymore, because remember, we have to switch all of these, and that's why we put this in this for loop in the first place. So we're going to replace this with a C, this with a C, and this with a C, and this with a C. So basically we're just changing all the zeros to C's here. And so this should be our entire bubble sort done. We need to get out of these loops. So after our last for loop, we're going to come down here, and we're going to call the toString method to print it. So we're just going to do toString. Since we are still in this class, we don't need to call it or anything. We'll just call the method, and we're going to pass in ARR, because that is what has been manipulated. And so let's run it and see if our bubble sort works, and then if our copy works, because we're going to copy it and turn it back into the initial array right afterwards. So running this, we have a lot of output here. This second bubble sorted array is a mistake. I meant this to be selection sort. And then we should probably, yeah, it'll make us make a method down here. And so we're going to switch this. This should be after our bubble sort and before our shell sort. So that is another method that we're going to have to create. But now that that's fixed, we can run it again. And we see that we have our initial array. We have our bubble sorted array. We have it as 2, 4, 5, 7, 9. And so that is it in order. And then we have it copied back to the initial state. So now that that works, we can cut this again, because now we're going to work on the selection sort. And then we'll paste it underneath our selection sort to see if our copy works again. And so that's the code for our bubble sort. Selection sort is a sorting algorithm that treats the inputs as two parts. There's a sorted part and an unsorted part. This repeatedly selects the proper next value to move from the unsorted part to the end of our sorted part. That'll make sense when we actually code it, and we're going to code this in descending order. So our bubble sort looked like this, and our selection sort is going to look like this, so in the opposite direction. In selection sort, we're going to first have a loop that goes over everything except for our last row. So it's going to be similar to this bubble sort. In fact, we can copy this whole first part, but just modify it a little bit. So moving this over, we are going to have system.out.println, and this is going to be selection sorted array. So we have this first for loop, and we should put our ending brace right here, and then we can go inside of it. So what we want to do is basically look over the entire initial array, and in fact we're actually going to be looking at only this column, the second column, 38759. So we're looking over 38759, and what we want to do is we want to go through the whole column and compare each of these values to the first value, and then the second value, and then the third value, and so on. And basically we're going to find the smallest and move them to the front. So inside of here, we are going to basically get the smallest index first. So we need something to store this in. It's going to be int, and we will call this index small, and then we're setting this equal. Initially we'll just set it equal to 0, and then we're going to want a for loop that compares every value in our column. So inside of here we're going to have a for. It's going to be int, and this int is going to be equal to a plus 1. And the reason why it's a plus 1 is because just like in the bubble sort, where we had it be row minus a minus 1, we don't need it to look over every single thing. We don't need it to look over the values that are already sorted. So once it does its thing, it's going to just be like this. As a matter of fact, if we wanted to, we could just do int b, and then we're going to have b is less than row minus a minus 1. We'll also initialize b to 0 if we're going to do it like this. And then we're just going to have b plus plus. And now we're going to be inside of our for loop. Inside of our for loop, for selection sort, we're going to say, well, if our smallest value is greater than the current value, we will swap these values. However, we check every value that we have not sorted in our column before we swap. So we're basically going through this whole time. I think this should be a will. So after we know this, we have this written out, we know what to do. And so if our smallest value is greater than the current value, it means we need an if statement. So we're going to look at our smallest value. We're going to say if the array at the b, and so this is the exact row that we're going to be looking at, if b is less than, or I'm sorry, if array b, and then we have to do the second index because it's a 2D array, and we're going to be in the first indexed or the second row, so we're going to have it be 1, is less than the array, and then we're going to have the smallest indexed because we're going to be comparing the smallest index. And at the beginning, we're going to set our smallest index to be the very first value. So what this is saying is we have this array right here, and it's looking at this column. Well, if the array b1, so if 9 is less than our smallest, this is going to be 0, 1, then we're going to be in here. Well, we're going to be comparing 9 to 9, and so we won't be in here. Next, what we're going to do is, because smallest index is still going to be 9, but however our b is going to be incremented, we're going to have 1, 1, which will be this part, and we're going to compare it to our 9. And so now we need to go inside of our if statement, and we're going to need to make our smallest index, which should actually be index smallest, or index small. We need to make this value, because this value is obviously the smallest index. And we're only taking the actual index, not the value, I'm sorry. So we're going to set index small equal to b. And this is going to store the new smallest value, because this value is obviously smaller than this one. So now that we have this, what we're going to do is we are going to, and this is after we've gone through every value in our column, we'll come outside of this loop right here, and we are going to make a swapping. And this is similar to what we did with bubble sort, where we performed the swap here. So we're just going to be performing swap. So inside of here, we're going to need a for loop, int c is equal to 0. And this for loop is only because we have to swap all of these columns. So now we're inside of here. We can make a temporary value, just as we did up here. It's going to be very similar. We're going to send int temp equal to our array, and we're going to do, instead of here, let's say we have array bc. Since we're doing it in descending order, it should be for this one, sorry. Since we're doing it in descending order, what we're going to do is we're going to do row -1. That way it will start from down here. And then because of this and because of our previous code, it's not going to look at these bottom rows anymore. And then it's just going to keep going up and up afterwards. So we're going to set it to C. That way it will look at all of the columns. Now what we need to do is we need to take this, and then we're going to set this equal to our smallest index, because we want to move our smallest index to this place, and then to this place, and this place, and this place. So we're going to have it like this, and then we need to make the array smallest index, which is the part where we're swapping it with, equal to the temporary value. So we're just going to put temp in here, and then we're going to place this 1 with C and replace this 1 with C, and so that should fix it. Now we can run this. We have our initial array, we have the bubble sorted array, we don't have a selection sort array, and that's because I never added this toString to print it out. So this is from our bubble sort, but all we're doing is just calling this. So we can come out of our last for loop, paste this in here and we can run it. Looks like we have another error with it, and this error looks to be from this for loop. And when I said that this was the same as this, I guess that's not entirely true, and that is because the way that the descending works and the way it works with this code. We want our we want our B to be going up every single time. We don't want our row to be going up every single time. When we had it up here for the bubble sort, it was a little bit different, but for here, what we want is we want our B to go up to the next value, and this is because we are not going to be looking at the lower values anymore. In the bubble sort, we weren't looking at the higher values. So if we run this now, it should work. We have a 9, 8, 7, 5, 3, and we can see that our columns swapped accordingly. And then our array was not copied correctly. So let's go back up here and manage that. So printing out the initial array, sort.toString array. Well, we did set our array equal to temp, but it seems like when we set it here and here, what ended up happening was it didn't copy over correctly. And this might be because we have to execute this every single time our code runs. So if we paste this right here, we can run it again, and we see that it has been copied correctly. So every time our code runs, we are going to need this temp right here. So we're going to need it to print our shell sort, and this should be the insertion sort. So we just need that temp is equal to sort.copy. So I guess that means we have to copy it over every single time for it to copy correctly. And so that's our selection sort done. We've copied it. We've proven that the copy works back to the initial array, and our bubble sort works in tandem with the selection sort. So now I'm just going to move this down here, or I'm going to move it underneath our shell sort, because that's what we're going to be attempting to run next. Shell sort deals with interleveled lists. Shell sort is a sorting algorithm that treats the input as a collection of interleveled lists and sorts each individual with a variant of the insertion sort algorithm. We're going to be using gap values to determine the number of interleveled lists. The gap value is a position integer representing the distance between our elements in the interleveled list, and for each interleveled list we are just going to divide the length, which is the row in this case, by 2. So now knowing that, we can start doing the shell sort. So we're going to print what this is first, so we're going to do a sysout, and then we'll do shell sorted array. And so that is done. We can come down here, and we're going to first split the list because of gap values. So we're going to have a for loop. We're going to have int a, and this is equal to the row divided by 2. And then we're going to do a as long as it's greater than 0. Because we're not setting a equal to 0, we're going to see if it's greater than 0. And then we're going to run this as long as a divided by equal to 2. So we're basically saying we have a is equal to a divided by 2. And then we're going to be inside of here. We're going to go through the split list now. We're going to have a for loop. We're going to have int b, and this is going to be equal to our a, for the same reason, or similar reason at least, that we had this in the second loop for selection sort and bubble sort. And then we're going to run this as long as b is less than our row, because we want to examine all of our rows. So remember, selection sort is not in the output here, but if we scroll up, selection sort is going to be this, and it's ascending. So we're going to look at every single thing in this row. And so knowing that, we're going to be back in here, and we're going to just do b++. So that for loop is pretty self-explanatory, but this split one is a little bit interesting. So inside of this for loop, we're actually going to be doing a lot. So first, we're going to create a temporary one-dimensional int array with the size of our column. And the reason why it's the size of our column is because we want to have everything in this column be in there for when we shift it. So knowing this, we are going to make ints temp, and we're saying it's equal to new, and then ints, we want to make sure the size is good, so we're going to have column. And then after this, we are going to, for a specified column, move b into our temp array. So we're going to have a for loop for this. We're going to have int c is equal to 0, and we're running this as long as c is less than our column, c++. And then inside of here, we are just going to do temp, our array. We're setting this equal to our array, b, and then c. We don't need spaces actually. It's not really great to do because it kind of already spaces it out a little bit. So we have temp c is equal to array bc. And so we're basically just going through all of these different values in every single different column, but still in the same row because we are in this row, and this row is dependent on which gap. So we're going to be gapping in between the rows. And so that is this for loop. We are going to make a variable int d, and we're going to set equal to 0. We're setting this outside of this for loop because we're going to be using it in the next for loop, and that is to look at the specific values. It'll make more sense when we actually code it. So we're going to have for, and then d is equal to b, and then we're going to have as long as d is greater than or equal to a, and our array d minus a with the index of 2, because the shell sort is looking at the third column, which index-wise is the second. And we're going to have this as long as it's greater than the temp, our column specifically that we're looking at is 2. And then we're going to have d minus equals to a. So that for loop has a lot inside of it. Basically what we're saying is d is going to be equal to b. So d is dependent on whatever this is. And as long as our d is greater than or equal to our a, so as long as we have something we can look at, and as long as this value is greater than this value, we need to swap them, d minus equals a. So there's a lot of nesting for the shell sort. And once we're inside of this for loop, we're going to do another for loop. We're going to do int, and we'll call this c. And the reason why we can use c again is because this row uses, or this for loop uses c, but only inside of itself. So we're going to use c again, and only inside of itself here. So for int c is equal to 0, c is less than column, and then we're going to have c++. Remember, this c is totally different from this next c. We're actually going to do that again as well. And then we're going to do array index d, index c, and then we're going to do is equal to the array, and we're going to have it at index d minus a, and then we are going to have it at index c. And so this is for the entire row. So this for loop goes over the entire row. And so that'll be that for that for loop. And after this for loop, and then after this for loop, is where we're going to use this d value that we created. So for, and then we want to go through the columns again, and we're going to do int c is equal to d, and we're going to do c as long as it is less than our columns. Remember, the columns, just a refresher, our row is 5 and our column is 4, and that's because we were working with a 5x4 array. So we'll have it as less than the column, and then we're going to do c++, and then this should just be 1 equal sign. Inside of here, we are going to have array, we're going to have d c is equal to our temp value c. And then after we do all this, we can come out of our last for loop, and we can print by doing toString, and we'll pass in our array. And now we can try running it. So pressing run here, initial, bubble, selection, shell, and initial. Checking our initials, they look good, nothing has changed there. Well, technically it has changed, but we have copied it, or we've sorted it, we've resorted it, we've copied it from the previous one, we've sorted it, and now we're copying it again, and then we're printing it out after our copy and our sort. So for the shell sort, let's see if it's right. We have 2, 4, 9, 10, 11. And so this is in the correct ascending order. Now what we're going to do is move on to the insertion row. So we've done testing this. I'm going to bring this underneath the print insertion sort, and we're just going to pull this down here. So we're going to do the insertion sort, and then we're going to do a search for the 5th row for the user number. So for this insertion, it's going to be a little bit different than the previous ones. Insertion sort is a sorting algorithm, and it treats the input, so our array, as two parts, a sorted part and an unsorted part. We're going to repeatedly insert the next value from our unsorted part into the correct location in the sorted part. So we're going to move it from unsorted to sorted. So inside of here, first thing that we're going to do is we are going to do a print line. And we've done this for every single one just to say what the method is. We're going to do a insertion sorted array. And then we can come down below here. And then what we're going to do is have a for loop. And previously we've gone over the rows, right? Well, now we want to go over the columns. So we're going to do int and a is equal to 1. We don't need to look at the first part because we're going to assume that the first part is sorted. And if it's not, we're just going to sort it while we look at the other ones. So int a is equal to 1, and we're going to run this as long as a is less than our column, and then we're going to do a plus plus. So we're going to come down here, and now we're going to do a little bit, but we're going to explain a lot of it. So we're going to insert at array row -1 a, and this is going to be into the sorted part. So basically what we're saying is row -1 is this last row, this 5th row. And we're going to be looking at the first value right here. We're going to move it into the sorted part. So we're going to compare it to this one. And we're going to stop this only once our array is in the correct position. Now from here, we're going to make a for loop. This for loop is kind of complex, has a lot in it. So what we're going to be saying is we're going to have a for, we're going to do int b, and this is equal to a. It's equal to a because once we've moved it into a sorted part, once we have this sorted, we don't need to look back at it. We're going to run this as long as b is greater than 0. And then we're going to have our and. We're going to do our array. Now we want this in the last row, so we're going to do row -1. And then our specific column is going to depend on which b we're currently looking at. So we're going to have b. And then we're going to run this as long as it is less than the array column, or the row doesn't matter. So we're just going to do row -1. We're going to be in the same row. And then we're going to have b -1. And this is going to compare it to the previous position. And then we're just going to have a b minus. And so having our b minus, we can eventually hit 0, and then we'll break from this for loop. So that's what that for loop will look like. We're going to swap our array, last row, and then whatever specific position we're looking at, and we're going to swap the array row -1 with the b -1. We're going to continuously swap until this value, so let's say this value, is less than the values before it. And that is again why we don't need to compare the first one. So that's what we're going to swap for. We're going to need a for loop to get through each and column. So we're going to use a for loop, and we're going to look through all of these. So inside of here, we're going to have an int c is equal to 0. And this, remember, this c is equal to 0 is going to be run as long as c is less than row. We've previously done column, and that's because we're looking at all of these columns. However, we're going to want to be moving these rows. So this insertion sort is a little bit different, completely the opposite actually as these, because we're looking at it horizontally instead of vertically. And now we're going to do C++, and then inside of here, we're just going to perform our swap. So we're going to make a temporary value. We're going to do int temp, and this is equal to the array, and our row is going to be C, it's dependent on C, and then we're going to have our column be B. And then we're going to set this value, which is written incorrect, that is a syntax error, that should be out there. We're going to set this value equal to this value. And so we'll paste this in here. And this row -1 should just be C because we are dependent on here. And then we're going to have a semicolon. Next, we are going to set this value, we're going to set this value because we put this value in here, and now we need to put something in here. We're going to set this value equal to our temp value. Now that we have this, we can just print. So we're going to call our toString method, which we made, and we're going to print that. So we'll come back up here. This is the code for the output. We're going to run it. We see we have initial, bubble, selection, shell, insertion, and initial. Our initials look the same, so that's good. And now we can look at the insertion. We have 4, 7, 9, 10, and all the rows, if we were to check them, look like they have switched properly. And so that is our code done. That's all of the sorting done. We can remove our test right here. However, there's one last thing we need to do. And that last thing is we need to search the 5th row for the user number. So to do this, well, we need to get user input, meaning we're going to need a scanner. We'll do a scanner. We'll call this scan, and we'll set this equal to a new scanner. We're going to call this system.in for input string, and I'm actually going to call this input just because it's a more fitting name. And then we'll close this off. We're going to import scanner, and that's going to be imported up there, java.util.scanner. So we'll come back down here, and then we're going to prompt the user for something. So we'll do sysout, and we're going to say, well, let's scroll down here to see what the output is. What number are you searching for in the 5th row? So we can just copy this, paste this in here, and we'll leave a space. We're going to change this to a print, that way the user's answer will be on the same line. We're going to come here, and then we're going to make a value to store this. We'll call this int answer, and we're setting this equal to input.nextInt, so it'll grab the next int. And from here, what we're going to want to do is we're going to put this into our search. We're going to search for this, so we're going to need a searching method. And matter of fact, we don't actually need to store this in here. Instead, we could take the input.next, and we can pass it straight to the sorting, or sorry, it should be sort. That's the name of our instance right here. Sort dot, and we'll make a method called search, and we'll pass this inside of here, and we'll close it off once we get out of the actual method itself. So we'll hover over this, create our search method. It will create it right here. I do not want that, so I'm just going to cut that, and then we're going to come at the very bottom right here, and we're going to paste it in, and we're going to work on this. But before we work on that, it's important to do the documentation for all of this. So above our bubble sort, our parameter is the array to be sorted, and then we're going to say up here bubble sort method for the column. And then we can really just copy this and do it for every single row. And this is going to be selection sort, and we can add that sorts and prints the array. That's a little bit more specific, so we'll add that in, and then I'm going to copy this in here, paste this in here, change this to selection sort. We're going to come down to the next one, which is shell sort. We're going to change this to shell, and then we're going to come down here with insertion sort and do insertion, and then we're going to come down to our search. So we'll write our search, and then we'll do a Java doc for it. So inside of here, we're going to want to make a binary search. It's asking us for a binary search, so we're going to have to code a binary search for it. So a binary search, as a refresher, basically uses a minimum, a middle, and a max value, and if our list is sorted, which it is, we have it sorted right here. If we run it, we'll see. We have it sorted right here. We are going to look through this. We're going to look at our mid, and we're going to look at our max, and we're going to look at our middle, and we're going to see if our middle is greater, smaller, or equal to. So we're going to have 3 cases inside of a while loop. So we're going to do int min, and our min we're going to set it equal to 0. And then inside of here, well, we are going to say, well, actually, we can do this in the same line. We'll set max equal to the column minus 1. And so what we're saying is, well, minimum is equal to the 0th index, and that max is going to be equal to the column, which is 4 minus 1. Now, there is actually a slight issue. So we're passing in the next int. We also obviously need to pass in our array. Otherwise, we have nothing to look at. So we're going to do int bracket arr, and then we're going to come up back to the top where we call the method, and we're going to add in array like this. That way we can have our array passed in as well. So int min is equal to 0, and then max is equal to column minus 1. In our while loop, we're going to have a while. We're going to do while min is less than or equal to our max, and then we're going to be inside of here. So int mid is equal to, well, to find the average, the middle, we're going to do min plus our max, and this is going to be divided by 2. And then we're going to have our 3 cases. So if the array, and we're going to be looking at specific indexes, we're only going to be looking at row minus 1 because it's asking us for the 5th row. 5th row is this 4th index. So we'll do row minus 1, and then inside of here we're going to have the mid value. So we're going to look at the middle column. And if this is less than our next int, well, that means that next int is greater than our middle. So we're going to need a new minimum value. We're going to set min equal to mid plus 1. We don't need to set it to the actual middle because it's obviously not the middle, and we can not include that. Otherwise, we'll be in this else if statement. It's going to be very similar to this. So we'll paste this in here. And if this is greater than our next int, or if our next int is less than this, that means we need a new max. So we're going to set max equal to mid minus 1. And so those are those. And then we're going to have an else statement. And this else statement is simply going to print our value. Or not the value, we want to print the whole column. So to print the whole column, we're going to need a for loop just like this. We'll do for int c is equal to 0, and we'll do, well, I did x here, but x works. So we'll do x is less than our column, because we're going to print it out for the whole, wait, I'm sorry, not column. We want to print it out for the whole row. Because remember, we're going to print this row, this row, this row, and this row, and then this row. But we're only going to be printing out it for the middle column. So we're going to do x plus plus, and then we're going to be inside of our for loop. And inside of our for loop, we're just going to do a sysout. We're going to do our array. We're going to have our x value, because that is our row, and our row is going to be incrementing. So the first time we're going to print out the value in this row, which would be, if we look at 9, we're going to print out 3. Look at this row, we're printing out 8. Looking at this row, we'll do 7. This row 5, and this row 9. So we have it like this. Our next value is going to just be the mid value. And so that is that. Now, if we don't ever find our value, we will break out of our while loop. And before, well, if we find our value, we don't need to go through our while loop anymore. So what we can do is throw a return. And this will return us back to the program. And we won't need to go through the while loop anymore. Now, if we don't find it, we're going to be down here. And we can just simply output sysout column not found. So let's test this out after this is correctly written in parentheses. So we'll go back up here, and we have this written out, and we can run it. So I'll move this over, press run, and it has run. And it asked what number are we searching for in the 5th row. Let's try out 9. This is going to print out 38759, which is what we're looking for. Let's run it again. Let's say we're searching for 4. Well, that is not good, because we do definitely have a 4 here. Maybe I pressed the space. Let's try running it again. 4, it says column not found. So that is an issue. We'll go down and we'll try to debug it. And after looking over my code for quite some while, there's nothing wrong with our search, nothing wrong with the insertion sort, and nothing wrong with the other arrays.
But there is something wrong with me. And that is because after the insertion part, remember, if we come up to the instructions, we are not resetting, or we're not going to reset the array back to the original contents. We only do this before each thing. So in setting our array equal to temp, resetting it, what we're doing is effectively we're resetting our array, and this is messing with the search code. So we shouldn't have this in there. And as a matter of fact, we don't even need this temp right here. We can have it though, because we're just saying temp is equal to sort.copy, which I'll leave in there. So if we run it again, and then I click in 4 and press enter, we get our row. Just to make sure, we're going to try it with every single one, make sure we have no errors. We have 7, we have 9, and lastly, or actually, we'll have 10, and lastly, we'll try something that's not in there. We'll try a good number, we'll call it 450, and we'll say column not found. So we've done it. We've completed the output, we've made our methods, we have the sorting class inside of here, so we have the sorting, we have initial array, and now we're done with the instructions. We can full screen this and look over the entire code. So this is the driver class that we have. We made an initial array 5 by 4. We could have easily taken user input and put it in here, but we hard coded this per the instructions, and now we have our main method, and this is going to output everything. Really, the main method is just kind of a holder for all of our methods for the instance of our sorting class. We have all this done. We have our class sorting. We have these private values. We have our default constructor where we set these values. We have our toString, which looks really nice. We have the copy, which also looks really nice. In fact, the whole code looks nice. We have our bubble sort right here. And then we have our selection sort right there. We have our shell sort. We have our insertion sort. And lastly, we have the search, which we can make a comment for. The parameter is the next int passed in by the user. And then the parameter array is the array to be searched. So what we're doing in here is we are searching for the column. We are searching and printing for the column that has the next int. And so this is our code complete, and that is how you would code this assignment and get the correct output. P.S. With this scanner, it is good practice to close our scanner. That way we don't have any resource leakage. So we need to do input dot, and then we're going to do close, and this will close our scanner. Not necessarily super important to this program, but it's good to note and it's good practice.